Cancel the entire cruise, Vincent D'Amaro said flatly, tugging off his Rolex and tossing it on the marble countertop of his penthouse kitchen. I'm not in the mood to sit on a yacht with champagne and strangers. His assistant on the other end of the call hesitated. Sir, it's a private cruise. You already paid in full. Then refund what you can and give the rest away. I don't care, he snapped before ending the call, running a hand through his dark hair. 3 days ago, he caught his girlfriend of 6 months at his own charity gala in the coachroom with someone else. He didn't even feel anger, just tired. Vincent, 32, self-made millionaire, owner of D'Amaro Ventures, could buy anything. Except, apparently, people who meant what they said. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, staring out over downtown Chicago. The city glittered beneath him, but it all felt empty. Meanwhile, halfway across the city, Nola Brennan stood behind the front desk at Lakeview Cruise Concierge, staring at the sudden cancellation on her screen. Wait, he canceled the whole thing, she said, blinking. The entire cruise? Yep, her coworker muttered. Vincent D'Amaro. That's the guy who owns like half the buildings on Michigan Avenue. Guess he bailed on his own luxury yacht rental. Nola looked at the open dates left by the cancellation. Her stomach tightened. Her parents' 50th anniversary was next week. They hadn't been on a real vacation in over 20 years, and Nola had been trying to find anything last minute. She glanced up at her boss's office. Then, back at the screen. She hesitated for 1 second, then she clicked. 4 days later, the sun was already setting over the water when Vincent's driver pulled up to the harbor. He stepped out of the car, sunglasses on, suitcase in hand, annoyed and confused. Why are we here? He asked his assistant, who was already sweating under the Florida heat. There was a technical error, his assistant said quickly. The cruise company never processed the cancellation. They said no refund was issued, and since it was fully paid, they gave it to someone else. But your name is still on the reservation. Vincent's jaw tensed. So I'm just supposed to share my yacht with a stranger. Not a stranger. A family. Just go on board and we'll fix this. Vincent stalked up the dock and onto the yacht, expecting to find a crowd of loud tourists. Instead, he nearly walked straight into her. She was barefoot, standing at the railing in a soft blue sundress, her hair pulled up in a messy knot. She spun around, startled. Oh, she said. Hi, are you one of the crew? Vincent blinked. Crew? Sorry, she said, laughing nervously. You just look, not like a guest. I mean, you're dressed like one, but you have this whole, serious face. He didn't answer. He was trying to place where he'd seen her before. I'm Nola, she said, stepping forward and offering her hand. I booked this cruise, you booked my cruise, he said dryly, not taking her hand. Her smile faltered. Technically, your assistant never finalized the cancellation. I checked, twice. You always hijack luxury yachts from strangers. Only on Thursdays, she said, crossing her arms. Look, I didn't know it was yours when I booked it. I just needed something special for my parents' anniversary. They're below deck, by the way, probably raiding the wine fridge. Vincent looked around. The yacht was spotless. The staff was already moving about, setting up dinner. And despite the chaos, she looked completely at ease. You really didn't know who I was? He asked. I mean, I recognized your name when I saw the reservation, but I figured you were too busy doing rich guy things to care. He stared at her. You're kind of mouthy, she grinned. You're kind of broody, and then, to his horror, he laughed. It was short, barely a chuckle, but it caught him off guard. Fine, he said. One night, then I'm leaving. Suit yourself, she said, but we're having shrimp scampi and it's amazing. Dinner was served on deck, under string lights that glowed as the sun dipped below the horizon. Nola's parents, Frank and Deanne, were friendly and warm, chatting with the crew and laughing over wine. Vincent, sitting at the far end of the table, kept mostly quiet until Nola sat beside him, offering him a slice of her mother's homemade cake. You're not eating, she said. You don't like shrimp? I'm not hungry, he muttered. She tilted her head. Bad day. Bad month. She nodded, then leaned in a little. Let me guess, someone broke your heart and now you're hiding out on your yacht being mysterious. He turned to look at her. Her eyes were soft but teasing. You're not wrong, she blinked. Wait, I was right, he didn't answer. Instead, he took the cake from her hand and placed it down, then he looked at her again, slower this time. There was something about her. She wasn't impressed by him, or intimidated. She wasn't trying to flatter him or get anything from him, she was just… Nola. The next morning, he was still there. You decided to stay? She asked, appearing on deck in a pair of sunglasses and a high ponytail. I figured someone had to make sure no one crashed my boat. Don't worry, she said, sipping her coffee. If pirates show up, I have a mean right hook. He smiled before he could stop himself. They spent the day anchored near a private island. Her parents relaxed below deck, while Nola coaxed Vincent into helping her set up a surprise dinner on the beach. As the sun set, they sat barefoot in the sand, passing a bottle of wine between them. So, Vincent D'Amaro, she said, stretching her legs out in front of her. What's it like being a millionaire? He glanced at her. Overrated, she laughed. No, seriously, he shrugged. It's a lot of people pretending, a lot of wondering if anyone actually likes you or just your bank account. She looked at him, quiet for a moment. Well, I'm broke. So you're safe with me. That night, she fell asleep on the sun deck. He found her curled up in a blanket, her hair fanned out across a lounge chair, breathing softly. He stood there for a long time just looking at her, and that's when it hit him. He didn't want her to leave, not tomorrow. Not ever. Vincent reached for the folded linen napkin beside his plate, but his eyes stayed on her. Nola was leaning over the table, laughing at something her father said, her hand brushing sand off the rim of her wine glass. The beach dinner had ended hours ago, but none of them had moved. The crew had quietly packed everything up, leaving only the flicker of torches and the soft roll of the tide. He wasn't used to this, staying in one place, letting a moment stretch without trying to control it. You always do this, he asked suddenly. Nola looked over. Eat dinner. Every now and then, yeah. No, he said, resting his elbows on his knees. Pull people into your world like it's nothing, like they've always belonged there. She blinked at him, caught off guard. I don't really think about it, I guess I just like people to feel seen. He nodded slowly. That's rare. She hesitated, then leaned back into her chair. You talk like someone who's used to being invisible in plain sight. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked out at the dark water, the reflection of the stars rippling like shattered glass. My brother used to say that, he said finally, when we were kids, that people only saw what they wanted to, everything else they ignored. You had a brother, she asked, her voice softer now. Had, he said, the single word cutting through the night air. He felt her pause beside him. She didn't apologize or press further, she just waited. He was older by 2 years, smarter, louder, always running ahead of everything, even when he didn't know where he was going. What happened? Vincent exhaled through his nose. Motorcycle, wet road. He wasn't drunk, just reckless. I was the one who bought the damn bike. He didn't know why he told her that. He hadn't said it out loud in years, but she didn't flinch, didn't turn away. She just nodded like she understood something unspoken. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Yeah, he murmured. Me too. From the upper deck, the sound of a piano drifted into the air. One of the crew had started playing in the lounge. Nola tilted her head. Is that Chopin? He looked at her, surprised. You know classical? My mom played at weddings when I was a kid. I used to sit under the piano and pretend I was invisible. Why invisible? Because then no one would ask me to dance, she said with a grin. I had 2 left feet until I was 16. He stood suddenly, holding out his hand. Let's test that theory. She blinked up at him. You want me to dance with you? Here, on the sand. He didn't answer, just extended his hand further. She narrowed her eyes. You're serious. Terrifying, I know, she laughed and stood, brushing her palms down the sides of her dress before placing her hand in his. It surprised him how naturally their bodies aligned. He rested one hand lightly on her waist, the other holding her fingers, and began to sway them to the distant music. You know how to lead, she said, raising an eyebrow. My mother sent me to cotillion when I was 12. She said I'd thank her someday. And are you, only right now? She looked up at him then, and something in her eyes shifted, not teasing, not playful, just searching. You don't talk about your family much. Because there's not much left to talk about, he said simply. She didn't press, but her silence said enough. She was listening even when she didn't speak. The night drew on, and when they finally pulled apart, neither moved right away. Their hands lingered, breath close, space between them thin as air. I should probably check on my parents, she said eventually, stepping back. He nodded, though her absence left something hollow in the air. The next morning, he woke earlier than usual. The yacht was still anchored near the island, mist curling over the waves like silk. He wandered to the galley looking for coffee and found the chef already preparing breakfast. But Nola wasn't there. He waited. 15 minutes. Then 30, finally, he tracked down one of the crew. She left early with her parents, the steward said. Said they had a flight to catch. Didn't want to wake you. Vincent stood still, the words not quite registering. They're gone. Yes, sir. About an hour ago. He went back to the sun deck, the same place she'd fallen asleep 2 nights ago, and found only a folded note weighted beneath a coffee mug. He unfolded it. Vincent, thank you for letting us stay. I know it wasn't the original plan, but it turned out to be the perfect one for us. You helped make their anniversary unforgettable, even if you didn't mean to. If I'd said goodbye, I might not have left, and that's not fair to either of us. Nola, the paper fluttered in his hand as the breeze picked up. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Loss, not the cold, distant kind he'd grown used to, but something sharper. Immediate. Like a door had opened, only to close before he realized he wanted to step through it. 3 days passed before he returned to Chicago. The city looked the same, but it didn't feel like anything. He stepped into his office, ignoring the stack of reports waiting on his desk, and pulled out his phone. He didn't have her number, didn't even know her last name. He sat down, staring at the skyline, and realized something with a clarity that knocked the air from his lungs. He didn't want to go back to who he was before her. He couldn't. Vincent stood outside the modest brick building, trying to decide if this was the dumbest idea he'd ever had. The sign above the door read Willow and Pine, Local Gifts and Goods. The display window featured hand-poured candles, postcards, and a crooked stack of cookbooks arranged beneath a banner that read Support Small. This was the 3rd place he'd visited that morning. The concierge at the yacht company had mentioned Nola worked in hospitality, and after a few quiet favors, nothing invasive, just a little well-placed curiosity, he'd found her name tied to a handful of boutique vendors in the Chicago area. He hadn't expected her to be here in person. But when he stepped inside, the soft jingle of the doorbell brought her into view. She was standing behind the counter, deep in conversation with a woman holding a box of handmade soaps. Vincent didn't move. He didn't speak, not until she looked up and froze. Vincent, she said, the word catching in her throat. The customer gave them both a curious glance before heading toward the back. I thought you left town, she added cautiously. I did. Then I came back. She watched him like she wasn't sure if he was real or some kind of hallucination conjured by fatigue and coffee fumes. You tracked me down. I prefer the term followed a lead. I didn't exactly leave directions. Trust me, he said, stepping further into the shop. I noticed. Nola folded her arms, leaning her hip against the counter. So what are you doing here? I was going to ask you the same thing, he replied. You disappear without saying goodbye, leave a note that might as well have been a closed door, and expect me to just go back to my life. She looked away. I didn't expect anything. That's the problem. The bell above the door jingled again as the customer exited, leaving the shop empty but for them. I didn't think you'd come looking, she said. That's exactly what you were hoping for, wasn't it? Her jaw tensed. No. I was hoping you wouldn't, she paused, because I didn't know what I'd say if you did. Vincent reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded napkin slightly wrinkled with a faint ring of wine etched into one corner. You left this on the deck, he said, placing it gently on the counter. You circled a line from the menu, raspberry lemon cake, said it was your favorite. Her face softened slightly. You kept that? I keep things that matter. She stared at the napkin like it might answer a question she hadn't asked out loud. Then she stepped from behind the counter, her shoes silent on the worn wood floor. I don't belong in your world, Vincent. Who told you that? She raised her brows. I don't need to be told, I've seen enough. This isn't about money, it always is. You just don't see it because you've had it long enough not to notice anymore. He studied her, the bluntness, the refusal to bend. It didn't repel him. If anything, it made him want her more. I didn't come here to argue, he said. Then why are you here? He stepped closer. Because I can't stop thinking about the way you held your breath when the boat rocked, or the way you cut your pancakes into perfect squares even when no one's watching. Or how you always speak like you're daring someone to prove you wrong. Her expression faltered. I've met people who wanted my money, I've met people who wanted my name, but you, he paused. You made me want to remember who I was before any of that mattered. She looked like she might cry, but didn't. Instead, she brushed her hands down the sides of her jeans and said, And what exactly do you want from me now? A chance. To do what? To see where this goes. She shook her head, laughing once under her breath. You show up at my work, which, by the way, is charming. And think a speech is enough? No, he said, but I was hoping it might be a start. She looked at him for a long time, then quietly, I close up at 6, he nodded. I'll wait. She tilted her head. You don't even know where I'd want to go. Wherever you're going is fine by me. That night, she took him to a diner tucked beneath the elevated train tracks. The booths were cracked vinyl, the waitress knew her by name, and the cherry pie arrived with a scoop of ice cream so large it dripped before they could finish. This is your idea of a date, he asked, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. You said wherever. I was expecting at least cloth napkins, she grinned. This place has better pie than any of your rooftop restaurants. He leaned back in the booth. I'm starting to believe that. She stirred her coffee, then set the spoon down. You said something earlier. About remembering who you were before the money. He watched her carefully. I did. So who were you? He hesitated, then said, a kid who wanted to build something that mattered. Not just buildings or companies, but something that lasted longer than headlines or handshakes. And now I want someone who sees me when I'm not wearing a suit. She nodded slowly, then reached across the table, fingers brushing his. What if I'm scared? So am I. They sat there, hands barely touching, the din of the diner fading beneath the hum of something neither of them could name yet. Later, when he walked her to her apartment and she turned to unlock the door, she paused. Tomorrow, she said. There's a street fair on Clark. I usually go. I'll be there. She opened the door, then looked back once more. You know this doesn't make sense, right? Nothing about you ever has. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like exactly the point. The first time Nola stepped into Vincent's world. It wasn't in a glittering ballroom or a sleek boardroom, it was at a charity auction held in a restored train station, the kind of venue that whispered elegance without trying to impress. The invitation had arrived without fanfare, tucked beneath her door in a thick ivory envelope bearing only a time and place. She'd stared at it for a long moment before folding it into her bag, unsure if it was a question or a promise. It turned out to be both. She entered the hall in a slate blue dress borrowed from her friend Marcy, understated but tailored. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne glasses and the subtle tension of people measuring each other with glances. But when Vincent noticed her from across the room, everything else quieted. You came, he said, appearing at her side, dressed in a navy suit that fit like it was made for him, which she suspected it was. But his voice was softer than the lines of his collar, and his eyes searched hers like he was still afraid she might vanish. I almost didn't, Nola replied, accepting the glass he offered. I don't exactly blend in with gemstone collectors and hedge fund legends. He barely looked at the crowd. They're the ones who don't belong. A flashbulb went off nearby as a photographer passed, but Vincent didn't turn. He was looking at her like the rest of the room had been painted in grayscale. Later that evening, after the final bid had fallen and the string quartet had packed away their instruments, he brought her to the second floor of the station. The space was empty now, once an old waiting room, all arched ceilings and tall windows that let the moonlight in like water. "I used to sit here," he said, walking toward a bench near the far wall. "Before I had a car. When I was still trying to convince banks to give me a loan to flip my first building." She sat beside him. "This is where it started. Most people remember the day they made their first million. I remember sitting on this bench, wondering if I'd have enough left after rent to buy printer ink." She smiled. "You're full of surprises. That's why I brought you here, Nola, not for the auction, for this." She turned toward him, something shifting behind her eyes. "Why me? Because you don't care where I've been or what I own, and somehow that makes me want to show you everything." The bench creaked softly as she leaned in, her hand finding his. "Okay, not a promise, not an answer, but something better, a beginning." In the following weeks, their lives began to tangle in ways that didn't feel forced. Vincent came to her shop on mornings too early for espresso, but just right for conversation. She met him between meetings, tucked beside him in the back seat of his town car, her head resting on his shoulder as he scrolled through contracts he barely read anymore. They didn't talk about labels. They didn't need to. Everything about them was unfolding without explanation, the way the tide pulls and returns without asking permission. One morning, he picked her up without warning. "You're dressed like we're going somewhere," Nola said, noting the leather gloves and the coat that fit him like a second skin. "We are," she arched a brow. "Do I get a hint?" "No, but I brought a coat for you." It was cashmere with buttons polished to a shine. She slipped it on without comment. He drove them out of the city, past the warehouses and overpasses and into the softer edges of the countryside. Eventually, he pulled up to a wrought iron gate that creaked open at the press of a button. "This was my brother's," he said quietly. "The land, I mean. He wanted to build a music school here. For kids who couldn't afford lessons anywhere else." Nola stepped out of the car slowly, her boots crunching over a gravel path. The land stretched wide, blanketed in early snow, empty except for the outline of a foundation that had never been finished. "I didn't touch it," he said, joining her at the edge of the frame. "Not after he died. I couldn't." She looked at him, her breath visible in the cold. "But you're here now," he nodded once. "Because I want to finish what he started, with your help." "My help?" she asked, startled. "You see people," he said. "You know what matters. I could build another tower, name it after him, slap on a plaque, or I could build something real, something that opens doors instead of just casting shadows." She swallowed hard. "You're serious." "Deadly." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked the outline of the structure, pacing slowly, her hands in her coat pockets. Then she turned back to him. "What if I say yes? Then we start tomorrow. What if I say no? I'll still build it," he said, "but it won't be right. Not without you." She looked at him for a long time, and then softly, surely she nodded. That night they stood in the center of the unfinished space, wrapped in borrowed heat from a portable lantern, their breath forming clouds between them. "I didn't expect to fall in love with someone like you," Nola said, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent took her hands, thumbs brushing her knuckles. "I didn't expect to fall at all." He kissed her then, not like a man proving a point, but like someone anchoring himself to the only thing that had ever felt unshakable. Months passed. The school broke ground. Nola's shop expanded, funded quietly by a partner she refused to name in interviews. Every time someone asked how she managed it all, she only smiled and said, "You'd be surprised what can grow when someone believes in you." On a crisp afternoon in November, Vincent brought her back to the same beach where they'd first danced. The yacht was moored nearby, but the deck was empty. Just a single table sat in the sand, candles flickering inside glass lanterns. A small box waited beside her plate. He didn't speak right away. He let her sit, let the tide hum in the silence, then he knelt beside her chair. "I canceled that cruise because I'd lost faith in people," he said. "But you showed me what it means to trust again, to build not just for profit but for purpose. Nola, I never imagined someone like you could exist outside of dreams, but you're real. And if you let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." She opened the box slowly. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, with a single diamond set off center, like it had always been meant to stand apart. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Yes," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Yes to all of it." And just like that, the man who'd once tried to cancel everything walked straight into the one thing he never knew he needed: forever. The first snow of winter fell thick and silent over the city, blanketing Chicago in a hush that made even the traffic seem thoughtful. Vincent stood beneath the canopy of the school in progress, now framed in steel and glass, the kind of modern beauty his brother would have rolled his eyes at while secretly admiring every detail. He watched as the last pane was lowered into place, the final wall of the atrium sealed with a quiet hiss behind him. Nola's voice rang out, cutting through the cold. "They're going to love it," she said, tightening the wool scarf around her neck. "You can already feel the energy here." "Like it's waiting to be filled," he glanced at her. "I want to name it after him, not just the building, the whole program." She didn't blink. "Then let's do it." He stepped closer, brushing snow from her shoulder. "You always say we now. That's because you stopped doing everything alone." They left the construction site as the sky turned lavender, the kind of winter dusk that looked like a watercolor. Vincent drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting between them on the console until hers found it and tangled their fingers together. At her apartment, she paused before unlocking the door. "I've been thinking," she said, not looking at him yet. "About what it means to say yes, to the school," he asked, "to you." He turned to face her fully. "You already did." "I know," she said, "but I said yes to us in pieces, first on the yacht, then at the diner, then in the snow outside the city, but I've never said yes to all of it. To the future, to whatever comes after the ring." He was silent. "I want to build a life with you, Vincent, not just projects, not just moments, a whole life, even the hard parts." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been waiting for someone to say that my whole damn life." Inside, the apartment was warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon from a candle left burning too long. She kicked off her boots, and he followed her into the kitchen where a calendar hung crookedly on the fridge. A single date was circled in red. "What's that?" he asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "It's the day your foundation opens, but I wrote new beginning instead." He reached for her waist, pulling her close. "You know, I've been thinking about that too." "About beginnings?" "Yeah, my lease is up next month. The penthouse is nice, but it's always been a little too quiet." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I found a brownstone in Lincoln Park, big kitchen, room for a real library. A little overgrown, but I thought we could fix it up, together." She blinked. "And before you ask," he added, "yes, it has a backyard, with space for that garden you keep talking about." She laughed, pressing a hand to her chest. "I was going to ask that next. I know." 2 weeks later, they stood beneath twinkling lights at a winter garden ceremony in front of 30 friends and family. Her parents held hands in the front row. Vincent's mother, quiet but proud, wore a silver shawl and dabbed tears from the corner of her eyes. There were no extravagant announcements. No press. Just vows whispered beneath falling snow, promises exchanged with steady hands and soft eyes. "I never believed in fate," Vincent said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "But then you showed up on my yacht like a hurricane." She smiled, tears shining. "I didn't mean to crash your life." "You didn't crash it," he said. "You made it worth living." They kissed as the snow fell harder, guests cheering with mittens in the air, champagne flutes clinking against one another like bells. Their honeymoon wasn't on a yacht or in a 5-star resort. It was a quiet week in the mountains of Vermont, where they cooked meals from scratch and read books late into the night. He bought her a journal. She filled it with sketches of the school, notes on future programs, and recipes she wanted to master in their new kitchen. Months passed. The school opened with a full roster and a waitlist that stretched through spring. Vincent taught a weekly business class for teens who had never imagined themselves in boardrooms. Nola ran the creative outreach program and taught music theory every Friday afternoon. One day after her last class, she found him leaning against the doorway of the music room, watching as she packed up her things. "You're late," she said, not looking up. "I was talking to the new kid's parents. They said he hasn't smiled in weeks." "Until today." She tucked a sheet of music into her bag. "I'm guessing it was your inspiring financial lecture on compound interest." "No," he said. "It was you. He heard your piano and said it made him feel like flying." She paused, then turned toward him slowly. "You're going to make me cry before dinner. That's the goal." Back at the brownstone, the garden finally bloomed. Wildflowers twisted up the trellis. Herbs lined the edges of the brick path. One Saturday morning, as Vincent trimmed back a stubborn rose bush, Nola stepped onto the porch holding a small white envelope. She handed it to him without a word. He opened it, eyes scanning the card inside, then he looked up. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded, biting her lip. He dropped the pruning shears and crossed to her in 2 strides, lifting her off the ground as she laughed into his shoulder. "I didn't think I could be happier," he whispered. "And then you go and do this." "You're going to be the best dad," she said into his neck. "No," he whispered back. "I'm going to be the luckiest." Later that night, they sat on the back steps, watching the fireflies flicker above the garden. Her head rested on his shoulder, one hand laced with his over the curve of her stomach. "I think we're finally home," she said. He kissed her temple. "We've been home since the day you didn't say goodbye." And with the stars above them, the garden blooming and the future curled quietly between them, they stayed right there together. Always.